I remember a day when my mood went from pleasant to very grumpy and depressed in about a 5-minute time span. The television show that I turned on featured a family doing some amazing and fun activities together, and this triggered my guilt that our favorite family pastime tended to be watching movies together, which didn't feel very extraordinary. Then came a commercial break. First, a commercial for a plastic surgeon. This is true. Then a commercial for a drug to fix thinning hair. Then a tutoring service to help kids get better grades. Then a new diet guaranteed to lose belly fat. At the end of 5 minutes, we viewers received the message that we are not enough in many different ways. Not extraordinary enough, not pretty enough, not smart enough, not thin enough. Everywhere we turn, we seem to get this message that we are not enough. And usually this message is followed by a remedy. Purchase this product and it will make you better. But it doesn't really make you enough, because there's always another way that you will be found to be lacking. It takes a toll on our self-esteem to be receiving these messages, battering us constantly. And it's not just companies shilling their products that take a toll on our sense of self-worth. Studies have shown that 1 in 3 respondents feel more dissatisfied with their own lives after spending time on social media. Most people only post to social media what we want the world to see of us, right? Our best or even imaginary selves. But when we read other people's statuses, we forget that it's only one-sided, and we envy other people in fear that what we're missing out on when our real life doesn't compare to what we see on someone else's social media. And these feelings of not being enough are exacerbated the farther away a person falls from whatever the cultural norm is of the time. If you are a person of color or indigenous or Black, if you are lesbian or gay or bisexual, queer, trans, gender nonconforming, if you have mental illnesses, if you're an addict, these messages can be entirely overwhelming. All of this piling on us leads to feelings of shame and intensely painful experience that we are flawed, and that because we are flawed, we are therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. We feel like we are unworthy because we can never, ever be good enough, perfect enough, thin enough, powerful enough, successful enough, smart enough, extraordinary enough, white enough, straight enough, feminine enough. Shame and vulnerability researcher Brené Brown, who has admittedly been in the news for some lack of vulnerability on her part recently, but a lot of her research, I think, still rings true for many of us. She says that most of us, if not all of us, have built significant parts of our lives around shame. Individuals, families, and communities use shame as a tool to change others and to protect themselves. To change others and to protect themselves. In doing this, she says, we create a society that fails to recognize how much damage shame does to our spirits and the soul of our families and communities. Shame tells us that we are not enough and that therefore we are unworthy of love and acceptance. But it lies. We are worthy of love and acceptance, each and every one of us. Part of the mission here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Indianapolis is to welcome and honor the inherent worth and dignity of all in our diverse community. And perhaps the starting point for this is to honor our own inherent worth and dignity, to have compassion for ourselves. And this may require confronting these feelings of shame and providing our own antidote. It's particularly fitting and poignant to provide an antidote to shame in this, a religious institution, because much of our cultural tendency towards being shamed comes from religion, one particular religious viewpoint that was adopted hundreds of years ago. I'm going to geek out, bear with me. And I'm talking about the theologian Augustine, also known as Augustine, depending on if you're Catholic or Protestant. Augustine and his particular interpretation of how Adam and Eve were cast from the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis. So let's refresh our memory just for a moment. This is a creation story that is shared by Jewish, Christian, and Muslim people. God created everything, and it was good. God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, a paradise, and gave them one rule: don't eat from this tree. Long story short, they did. And they lost their innocence and were cast out from paradise. Now, Augustine was an early Christian theologian, writing around the year 400, a long time ago. It was his view on original sin that became church doctrine. So it's important to know that there were a lot of theologians that were saying, no, this should be doctrine, no, this should be doctrine, and they often conflicted with one another, and Augustine's won. He thought that libido interfered with Adam and Eve's willpower. It made them prideful and foolish, and so they sinned against God and ate from the tree. But this act, this very first original sin, was not confined to Adam and Eve. Augustine said it is passed down to all human beings, and that it is this original sin that separates us from God, from the divine, and makes us doomed to spend eternity in hell. My colleague, the Unitarian Universalist minister Ian White-Maher, speaking to a group of UUs, eloquently connected original sin to the shame that many of us internalize. He said, one of our greatest fears is of being loved and then having that love taken away. It is devastating because it can reaffirm those voices in our heads that tell us we are not good enough, that we don't deserve it, that we are always messing things up. Unfortunately, this has also happened culturally to us with the sacred relationship, he says. The primary story for half the world's population is of Adam and Eve and God, and within just a few paragraphs of the story's opening pages, humans have disappointed God so greatly that we are thrown out of paradise, and it is forever hidden from us henceforth. We made a mistake, and in this story, God cannot or will not forgive us, and the rest of the story is about us trying to show that we love God, but are never really good enough. No matter how many times we replay this story, we human beings always fall short. We always get kicked out of the garden. We always get separated from God, from the divine, from love, and this is the hardest work in the world. It is excruciatingly painful because we human beings are hardwired for connection, connection with one another, connection with the divine, connection with love. Connection, Brown says, is why we are here. It gives purpose and meaning to our lives. Our shame is what keeps us disconnected, is what causes suffering. But what if we turn this story around? What if Augustine got it wrong? God, I hope he got it wrong. American priest and theologian Matthew Fox denies the doctrine of original sin and instead writes of original blessing. He says that we are born into love. Instead of focusing on being cast out of paradise, he looks at the preceding verses. First, God created heaven and earth, and it was good. And God created day and night, and that was good too. And then God created the sky and the earth and the waters and the plants and the animals and the people, and after everything God created, God declared it was good. Fox writes, we can say blessing preceded creation, for blessing was its purpose. Thus, there is no doubt that original blessing is the basis of all trust and of all faith. Original blessing, Fox says, underlies all being, all creation, all time, all space, all unfolding and evolving of what it is. As Rabbi Heschel put it, just to be is a blessing. Just to live is holy. Fox's theology resonates with historical Universalist theology, which focused on a benevolent God who would offer universal salvation to all. Our Universalist heritage teaches us that no sin, original or not, is too great to separate us from the divine. Original sin tells us we are dirty, shameful creatures, unfit to be in the presence of the divine. But original blessing tells us that we are good, we are lovable, and we are enough. So, what does it look like to incarnate or embody a belief in original blessing rather than original sin? Brown says the opposite of shame is being wholehearted. Wholehearted living, she writes, is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter how much gets done, I am enough. It's going to bed at night and thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging. In her book, Daring Greatly, How the Courage to be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent, and Lead, Brown writes that because true belonging only happens when we present our authentic, imperfect selves to the world, our sense of belonging can never be greater than our level of self-acceptance. We can increase our level of self-acceptance, she says, through practicing vulnerability. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable with one another and even with ourselves, we strengthen our connection to our own worthiness and to each other. Brown says that vulnerability is the birthplace of love and belonging and joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It is the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity. If we want greater clarity in our purpose or deeper and more meaningful spiritual lives, vulnerability is the path to wholeheartedness. And so I am going to ask you to be vulnerable with me for a minute and to be vulnerable with one another. I would like to pass around a blessing. Yesterday, I had the joy and privilege of being able to do glitter blessings at the Pride Festival, and I was reminded of how we all need to be told that we are lovable and that we are loved and that we are enough, especially those of us who are far from what society says is acceptable. So I'm going to invite us to bless each other this morning. I'm going to start with a few people scattered around the sanctuary, and then we're going to pass it on, much like we would pass an offering basket. until each of us has been blessed by someone else and has had the opportunity to bless someone else. So here's how it's going to work. The person giving the blessing will turn to a receiver who is sitting near them, and the person giving the blessing will say, "You are enough." And the receiver will then answer, "I am enough." And then together you say, "Blessed be." And then the receiver turns to their neighbor and becomes the giver. It's like a game of telephone. Does that make sense? Now, I understand that this may be excruciatingly uncomfortable for some of you. And so if you do not feel that you can step into this discomfort, then you are absolutely able to pass. And so just hold your hands over your heart like this, and that will be the symbol to the giver to just skip you and move on to the next person. Okay? Now, for those of you who are watching online, after I get the blessing going here in the sanctuary, I invite you, if you are watching with someone, to turn to each other and to bless one another. I encourage you to pass the blessing around through the chat as well. I invite us all to be quiet in the sanctuary as the blessing moves around. All right, and remember, you are enough, I am enough, blessed be. All right, let's get this going. Is there anyone who would like to receive a blessing who has not gotten one yet? Okay. You're welcome for making her cry. Shame tells us that we are not good enough, not perfect enough, not thin enough, not powerful enough, successful enough, smart enough, extraordinarily enough, etc., right? But shame's origins are in a faulty theology of original sin passed down through the generations. Instead of shame, let us embrace a universalist theology that tells us we are lovable, we are worthy, we are enough. You are enough. A theology of original blessing. And now to end, I invite you all to join me in what's called a litany of wholeheartedness. After each phrase I read, I invite you to respond with the words on the screen, which are, we let go of who the world tells us we ought to be and embrace who we are. Okay? Because there have been times when shame has crushed our ability to be wholehearted, we let go. Because we have not always had the courage to be imperfect. Because we have struggled to have compassion for ourselves or for others. Because we have been afraid of our own vulnerability. Because we are sometimes too scared to live authentically. Because we want to be wholehearted people, confident in our worthiness and in our belonging. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for sharing your blessings with each other. May you always know that you are enough, that you are lovable, that you are loved, that you are worthy, and that you are indeed holy and sacred. May it be so. May we make it so. Blessed be.